Councilman Delgado and myself and all of our guests, our panelists for this really unprecedented first time town hall meeting, taking a look at community policing here in Northern Nevada. You will have the opportunities for all of you who are watching out there to send your questions in throughout our town hall on tonight. You can send your questions to questions@reno.gov, questions@reno.gov, and your moderators here we'll be looking at the questions. We're going to take as many questions as we possibly can at the end of our broadcast, not the broadcast, but at the end of the presentation. We want you to have some information so that you know what to ask your questions about. Now, all of you know that we're here. We're in unprecedented times here in our community, in our state, across the country, and even you can say globally, right? Across the world. People are concerned, they're confused, they're saddened, they're frustrated, and they're even angry as all of us take a look at some of those things, atrocities that have happened, on death and so on, protests, peaceful protests certainly, but certainly some rioting, and just really some upheaval in our community due to the recent events. And I've had many, many calls, and I'm sure Councilman Delgado has as well, from community members, from colleagues, even from family members saying, what can we do right here in our community? How do we begin to deal with this thing that we call police reform right here in Northern Nevada? And I'm going to pause just for a minute. For those of you who may be jumping on late or maybe not be jumping on at all, if you can't get connected, you can watch us on Charter Channel 193 as well as on KTVUN. I got it right. KTVU, that's in San Francisco. I blame Mayor Hillary for that one. KTVN right here in Reno, Channel 2, our CBS station. They're carrying this live, so anyone with a smartphone can follow and ask questions as well. So tonight we're going to present and discuss findings of an independent review. You'll learn more about that as we go on, of the 3 largest law enforcement agencies right here in our community. A little bit about just a precursor to the information we're going to get in detail about our study. The study was completed in 2018, and so we're going to look at what progress has been made in these 3. That's the City of Reno Police Department. Chief Solo is with us. The City of Sparks Police Department. Chief Kroll is with us. And the Washoe County Sheriff's Office, and Sheriff Balaam is with us as well. They're going to each present what has happened. What progress has been made in those 2 years. Dr. Nancy Bruin is with us from the Gwynn Center. You're going to hear from her. And they were the independent outside party that did this study for us. Now, what we will look at what progress has been made in these 2 years, and we'll also look at what needs to be done, which will lead us to the police symposium that's going to happen later on this year, sometime in the fall. Now, the format is going to be such as this. We know we will not have time to review all 90 pages of the final report that Dr. Bruin and her team at the Gwynn Center put together. However, what she has done is just pulled out the most salient recommendations based upon, got some feedback from our local law enforcement agencies in terms of what does our community want to see, what are they most interested in, what are the things that concern them the most related to those recommendations. We'll go agency by agency in the order of the report. There is a link to the report. I know that's on the Northern Nevada Police and Community Coalition Facebook page. There's a link right there. Please download that report if you will, or you can go directly to the Gwynn Center and get that report as well. Download it and follow along with us. She's pulled out those salient recommendations in consultation with law enforcement, and then we're gonna have an update from each of the CEOs, the chief executive officers, that means chief and sheriff, of our law enforcement agencies. Then they're going to talk about, she's going to go agency by agency, and each agency head then we'll jump in and say, this is what we've done. They're going to have some responses, some comments, and this is what we're still working on. And again, once again, we're going to have the questions at the very end. Now, before we go on, you have to always say thank you. I would like to acknowledge and thank. We had a great task force. Great task force that we put together when we decided to start this project, and Councilman Delgado going to speak to you about that. But these members of our task force served unselfishly, without much explanation. Please, let's put that list of those task force members on the screen if we can. Yeah, that should be on the slide that we have. Put those up there if you can, because we really just want to say thank you say thank you to them. They were asked to serve without much explanation. They were asked to keep our work confidential. In fact, we actually met in the basement of Dr. Manera's church, Word of Life Ministries. That's why you see his picture there on the screen as well. He hosted us every meeting that we had, and even threw in coffee and water. They also were asked to do this. They got no recognition. We realized that this was such an important event, especially when we began the work in 2016, that many people wanted to be a part of it, but we knew that if we got a very large committee, we would get nothing done. We'd still be meeting, waiting for a report. A special thank you, as I said, to Dr. Manera for hosting, Cesar Manera for hosting all of our meetings, and also to Commissioner Kitty Jung, who couldn't be with us on tonight, but she was extremely involved in this work. You'll see her name on the list, and then the others you will see, Senator Julia Ratty from the great state of Nevada is joining us as well. She served on the committee. She began as a Sparks City Councilwoman and went on to become a state senator, and she was very involved, gave me a lot of good advice and spoke to us along the way. She's also one of our panelists tonight in case questions come up related to state or funding or legislation or anything like that. And finally, I would be remiss if I didn't thank those law enforcement CEOs that I mentioned, Chief Soto, and then from time to time he sent Deputy Chief Miller to meet with us, Chief Brian Allen from the city of Sparks, and flowed into Chief Pete Kroll, and then Sheriff Chuck Allen began it, and then Sheriff Balaam jumped right in and just kept this thing moving. I need to thank our law enforcement heads. It is not easy to allow an outside agency to come in and look at what you do. I don't care what occupation you are in. But they did it. They did it with full participation. They did it with wholehearted support, and they did it with honest communication. Honest communication. We had a philosophy, Councilman Delgado and I, going into this. We want to do this with law enforcement and not to law enforcement, and they made that possible. So without the support of those three leaders in our community, we could not have done what we've done, and we would not be here without the work from that internal review. So now my colleague, my friend, my co-chair and co-moderator for tonight, Councilman Delgado. Oscar, how did we get here?
A lot of work. Thank you, Dr. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you, everyone, the panelists. Just for all the viewers out there, we are practicing social distancing. We don't have our masks on. We made sure we got our 6 feet apart, so you'll see us without our masks this evening, but we made sure that we are practicing social distancing, especially with COVID-19 hitting and affecting so many in our community thus far, still to this day. So again, I want to make that clear to everyone.
Yes.
Thank you again, Dr. Taylor. It is an honor to be co-moderating this event with you today, and echo all your comments regarding the thanking of all the agencies that are with us today on this panel. It's a very, very important conversation.
Yes, it is.
And I think it's also important that we maintain a level of perspective today as well. As we move forward on these conversations, when we first started working on these issues more than 3 years ago, we saw that there were opportunities for improvement with some of our local law enforcement agencies. That doesn't mean that any agency was doing a bad job, but we recognize more could be done, and that more had to be done. With that being said, I see today as a continuation of a conversation about making systemic changes. I say systemic changes because I see our law enforcement community as part of our overall community.
Absolutely.
And I know that the overwhelming majority of our officers hope that our communities of color see them as a partner and not as a threat. We're here today to continue that conversation on making systemic changes, and at a point that I think is important to remember is that this conversation should never stop. We should be constantly assessing and reassessing what we're doing around policing.
I'm going to interrupt you just for one. You want to go ahead and put up that next slide, slide 3? That kind of gives some background to what Councilman Delgado is going to be speaking of. Thank you. Go ahead, Councilman.
I want to provide you with some background on the history of the Gwen Center report. In 2016, Dr. Taylor and I had a discussion regarding several incidences of police brutality in communities of color around the country. We knew that we couldn't bury our hands in the sand and pretend that those types of issues don't affect Northern Nevada. So we formed a regional group to examine the recommendations contained in the President's 2015 Task Force of 21st Century Policing. And very early on, something that was very important to us was to have a nonpartisan, non-political external group do an assessment on what our regional law enforcement was doing well, and also what could be improved upon. The result was that Nonpartisan external review was the Gwen Center report on policing, community policing in Northern Nevada, which was published in 2018. That assessment found that there were things our regional officer agencies were doing really well, but also determined that there were several areas where we needed to improve. The Gwen Center report provided more than 40 recommendations on what our regional law enforcement agencies could do to improve our relationships with our communities. There were several obstacles in taking the next steps regarding the Gwen Center report's recommendations. Some key players had some health issues, and there were some fiscal constraints. But in my opinion, the biggest obstacles was that once the media attention died down and there was loss of momentum and a certain level of comfort crept in on these issues, and the feeling was that we no longer had to make this a top priority. I really want us to maintain that momentum this time around. Again, thank you to all those participating today. I'm truly, truly excited and thankful for all those that have made the time and effort to be part of this panel and have these uncomfortable conversations. And with that being said, I'd like to turn the stage over to Madam Mayor Sheevy of the City of Reno.
All right, thank you, Councilman. Can you hear me? I know on Facebook everyone can hear really well. I think through Zoom we're having a little bit of technical difficulty on my end. Can you hear me, Councilman? All right, great. Okay, perfect. First of all, I want to say thank you so much to Dr. Angie Taylor and Councilman Delgado for your work over the years on this. Your dedication has been unbelievable. And so I just want to say thank you for everything that you guys bring to the table and all the work that you have done. I also want to say that, you know, our community is really at a time where this is our moment. And so I'm so grateful for everyone that has come to the table. And I think it's important because I think in some ways we might not have done a great job telling our story. President Obama mentioned Reno specifically for their 21st century policing. And that's a really big deal and a really big honor. When I would go to Conference of Mayors, there were a lot of mayors that would say, what are you guys doing in Reno, Nevada? And I was so proud and impressed, and I still am to this day. And you know, there's a lot of things that we've put in place that a lot of people don't know about. And I think that's important to let the community know, because I always say a safe city is a prosperous city. So I want everyone to know that certainly from the City of Reno and all of our partners are incredibly committed. I also want many people to know that we have had so many officers reach out, had many conversations, and say, we want to be part of this community because we are part of this community. We love this community. We want to give back to this community. When I put on that badge, I am so proud. So please know we're all going to be doing this together. And I think that's really incredibly important. And one of the things I want to say, thank you to Officer Casanelli. He's our embedded resource officer, someone we put in strictly to deal with mental health. That was something that, you know, we had just accomplished. Working more with 360 Blueprint, I think, is incredibly important, those kinds of initiatives. So I just want to say, you know, thank you so much. And the City of Reno is incredibly committed. And Oscar and Angie, or sorry, Dr. Taylor, Trustee Taylor, I got to get it right. And Councilman, I'm very, very grateful. Well, I bow to you, Angie. You're amazing. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We're going to ask now Councilwoman Charlene Bybee is here with us. Thank you so much, Councilwoman, for being here. Former Mayor Gino Martini was on our committee and attended our meetings and for as long as he could. And he himself, as Councilman Delgado, he was also one of the committee members that ran into a few health issues, but he stayed involved and stayed connected to it. And so thank you so much, Councilwoman Bybee, for being here on behalf of the City of Sparks. One thing to know is this study was paid for by the City of Reno, the City of Sparks, and the Sheriff's Department from Washoe County. We love Dr. Nancy Bruin again. Thank you for being here. The Gwen Center is amazing, but they aren't free. We had to pay them, and they were worth every penny of it and then some, quite frankly. We might owe you more money. Nancy did an incredible job on this report, so thank you. We went before both city councils. Reno City Council supported us without reservation. The Sparks City Council did just the same. So thank you again, Councilwoman Bybee, for being here to talk about why did the City of Sparks support this effort?
Thank you so much. So glad to be here representing the city. I've lived 56 out of my 66 years in the City of Sparks. So seen a lot of changes in the growth of my city and how big we are now, and just as we've grown and learned things through the years. I will say Sparks is at the table, and we're committed. We have been committed to community policing. It's a priority for the city of Sparks. In 2016, the council did approve a $15,000 allocation to pay for the Gwynn study because we felt it was something really important and needed. And I think as Councilman Delgado mentioned, there were things happening nationwide that really made all of us locally kind of stop and reevaluate are we doing what we need to be doing? Are we addressing these things before we have situations like we were seeing in other parts of the country? And I think that's critically important. I know that the study was looking at building on law enforcement efforts to build trust and legitimacy in our community, looking for more transparency, and how we could be responsive to the community, which are all priorities for law enforcement and for the city of Sparks and for all of us as leaders. Sparks has done community policing the last few years. We've really amped that up. We've had barbecues in neighborhood parks, reaching out to actually be in the community so that families and people could meet our police officers. You know, the kids could see the equipment. They could, you know, to bridge that gap of between the community and our police department. We have implemented some of the Gwynn study recommendations, and we continue to work on more. We haven't implemented them all, but it's currently a work in progress. We have our policy online. However, we are also challenged with a website that's not so technologically advanced, and we are in the process of updating our website. So we recognize our website needs some work, and we are working on that. Our use of force policy, which goes by those national standards, was adopted in 2001, updated continuously. 2017 was another update, and I think we're looking at it again now, of that use of force policy and how we implement it and how it's working for us, and what more we need to do. One thing we need improvement on is communications. When I talked to the chief today, he shared what Mayor Shivi mentioned, that sometimes we don't tell you what we're doing. You know, we're doing things, but we're not sharing that. You know, and a lot of us in our everyday jobs, we do the work we're supposed to do, and we don't always, toot our own horn and brag about it. And so the communications are important for us to let the community and to let you know what we're doing and what we're working on. I think the mental health component, which Mayor Shivi mentioned, the city of Sparks, along with Washoe County Sheriff's Office and Reno PD, has implemented a national model policy called the MOST program, which is the Mobile Outreach Safety Team. And that's mental health professionals going out with our officers and going on calls to be there in those situations where it's a mental health issue, has been so incredibly valuable, and we hope to expand on that. It's critically important to this issue for us. I believe this starts with each one of us. It starts with us as individuals. I think it starts with our law enforcement, with the city, with our region, state, and nation, to make a difference. And I think that we can. The City Sparks is committed to working together, and we are looking forward to implementing even more recommendations from the Gwynn study, and to find out in this group today what we can do together as a community and as a region to improve our community policing and our communities by working together. And it's going to take all of us. So we're on board. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Councilwoman Bybee. We appreciate your being here. And finally, but certainly not least, we have Chairman Bob Lucy, who's here representing the County Commission. And although the Sheriff's Department is funded not directly from the County Commission, we thought it was really important. And that was with the support of Sheriff Allen to go before the County Commission to ask them for support of this, and because we want them to be aligned as well. And again, Commissioner Kitty Jung helped to kind of champion that as we went to that meeting and so on. But the County Commission all jumped on board and were fully supportive. So thank you, Chairman Lucy, for being here with us today.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here with all the great panelists today. On behalf of the County Commission, First of all, I want to thank you, Dr. Angie Taylor, for hosting such an amazing panel tonight. We're going to have some great conversation, and Councilman Delgado for helping moderate. I think the discussion is prudent in a time like this, and we're looking forward to discussing and learning more about the findings from the Gwen Center Community Policing Report. On behalf of the Washoe County Commission, we have supported this effort through Commissioner Kitty Jung. As you pointed out, Angie, she has been a very vigilant individual as she continues to fight for that social equality through everybody and making sure that our police forces are doing the best we can within our community. And we want to thank her appreciate her service and input to this important community discussion, as we're going to hear from her a little bit more tonight. You know, one of our greatest assets here in Northern Nevada is our ability to work together as a region. And I'm very proud of that. And I think this is really going to be one of those regional efforts that we need to continue to work together to address, and how we're going to make the most out of the reform and any changes in our situation. We know that the Washoe County Sheriff's Office, the Reno Police Department, and the city's are separate and distinct agencies. However, we do need this communal understanding as we approach this type of reform throughout our region. So as we strive to make these changes in these five very significant areas that the Gwen Center has pointed out in the community policing report, we want to make sure that we address those. And one of the biggest themes that comes from that is working together to develop and achieve more out of those types of areas. I think, as Councilwoman Bybee pointed out, the MOST team is one of those tremendous regional efforts that we've looked at. Mayor Sheeby pointed out continually the unification of our officers and how we address things in public. It's really, these are peace officers, and public safety is a key point that we need to continue to focus on and how we address that. You know, the County Commission has worked diligently and closely with Sheriff Darren Balaam to make sure that we are supportive of any of his endeavors as he moves forward to support the reforms and changes that he sees necessary for the Washoe County Sheriff's Office, and work close-handed with all of the police forces within the region to make sure that this is a unified approach. We want to make sure that the public accountability and transparency is number one for us, and we were going to continue to focus on those and the other, also with many of the other 5 areas that we need to continue to focus on. So I want to thank our regional professionals for getting on tonight and supporting this effort, having this very detailed conversation, and hopefully gain some very unique and very greater understanding to this issue and how we can address it better as a community and as a region. So thank you for allowing me to be a small part of this discussion tonight. I look forward to listening and learning more about this community policing in Northern Nevada and what we can do together as a region. And I'm looking forward to seeing what more we can do out of the Gwen Center report. So thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner Lucy. It's always great to have you participate in some of these regional conversations. That's a beautiful part about Northern Nevada. We could all get together and hash out some of these tough conversations and ultimately all seeking the same outcomes. My next guest to start working into the Gwen Center report, I'd like to introduce Dr. Nancy Brune, who is the Gwen Center Executive Director, who's now going to provide us more information as to the processes, the methods, the outcomes, and the recommendations in terms of how the report is. Thank you, Dr. Brune, for joining us today.
Thank you, Councilman Delgado and Dr. Taylor, for having us here to present our findings. I just have a quick question. Is the PowerPoint I sent over being shown anywhere?
Yes. Yes, what you may just say is ask them to advance the slide.
Okay, because
I'm center slide. Yes.
So
okay.
The folks on Zoom.
Well, no. So I actually don't. If we want to move ahead, I'm gonna, in the interest of time, I'm actually going to go to the first Reno Police Department slide on accountability. And given that I only have 10 minutes to sort of highlight I think the most interesting recommendations that came out of the report, I want to have more of a conversation. So I'm actually not going to follow and go through every single bullet on the PowerPoint. I just want to, again, sort of preface my remarks and the recommendations with the following. please do read the 100-page report. And I want to make it clear, as others have already echoed, that when we met with the agencies and when we looked at the president's final report was presented from the task force on 21st century policing, there are a lot of great things that the 3 law enforcement agencies are doing with respect to community engagement, community input, transparency. So I want to be very clear about that. There were 5 areas. The first was about public accountability and transparency. And that really, if you read the report and read other research reports, that really talks about prioritizing data. And so when we looked at Reno Police Department, their sort of the recommendation, best practice is that all policies, all data, all operations data is reported. And at the time, Reno Police was doing a great job publishing its policies on its website. There was less information available about operations data or data regarding summons and arrests. And so I would love to know sort of where RPD is around publishing data. Also in the accountability bucket, they emphasize, or the task force on 21st century policing recommends community input, sort of maximizing community input and looking for ways to bring community members into the design of policies or guidance, thinking about how to use different technologies. And I will say, Reno Police Department is quite the leader in the region. It has not 1, but 2 advisory councils, the Chiefs Advisory Board and the Chiefs Impact Panel. One of the recommendations in our report was to actually work more collaboratively with some of the committee members on those boards to develop the agenda. I think the sense was that the chief and leadership brought the issues to the community without that collaboration to develop a shared or a mutual agenda. And so that was one of our recommendations, that the meeting agendas are actually drafted with community input. And also to include the community in the review of existing policies or drafting of any new policies that the agency, the department may consider. The other recommendation that I'll highlight in this bucket has to do with developing immigrant-specific policies. And at the time that this report was issued, there was some concern around the state, including up in Northern Nevada, about some of the rhetoric coming from Washington, D.C., and some of the policies that felt very hostile towards immigrants. And as many of you know, we have one of the highest percentages of undocumented immigrants in the entire country as a share of the population. And so there was considerable concern or fear, really, up in Northern Nevada. At the time, there was an ICE office located at the jail. I don't know if that's still the case, but as a result, when we talked to folks, there was concern about sort of the law enforcement's interaction and engagement with the immigrant community. And so one of the recommendations was that RPD develop specific policies or an official policy and training for officers regarding circumstances under which its officers could report or refer individuals to immigrant enforcement officers. And part of those immigrant-specific policies also included developing materials in English and Spanish, being on the website, holding community meetings in English and Spanish to share information about those specific policies with the immigrant community. So those are sort of high-level recommendations under that first bucket. The second area that we looked at was training. And as many of you know, there is quite a bit of training involved. So you can correct me if I'm wrong, Chief Soto, but new officers, I think, have 700 hours of training, and then every year to maintain your post-certification, you have to do at least 24, and then you also require up to 12. So officers have a lot of training. In our analysis, there was some recognition that there were some gaps in current training. And I believe at the time that this report was written, there had actually been an increase in use of force incidents in Reno Police, whereas over in Sparks and Washoe County Sheriff's Office, you'd actually seen a decrease in use of force incidents. And so there was some concern about training and adequate training. One of the recommendations is to conduct regular audits of trainings and evaluations of trainings, and then to work on adopting a de-escalation first as a policy before any use of force is administered. The other recommendation that was in the report and also echoes the 21st Century Task Force report is to actually collect and report data. So report again to the public in the interest of transparency, how many hours of de-escalation training are officers receiving? What percentage of the force is actually participating in the training? And then what is the ratio, for example, of less lethal and de-escalation training to lethal training tactics? And again, the percentage of the force that's participating in those types of training. So one of my questions to you is, are you in fact conducting an audit of trainings, and have you adopted the recommendation of actually tracking and reporting on the different types of trainings that officers are receiving? The third bucket or area that we looked at was internal policy development. And a couple of those jump out in the long list of recommendations. One is to, again, review and invite community input to develop policies surrounding the use of body-worn and dashboard cameras and the use of technology. Another recommendation is to establish a serious incident review board. I know that all of the agencies have an informal internal peer review process when there is a serious incident, but one of the recommendations of the task force report, which we echoed in our report, was to actually establish a serious incident review board that is peer reviewed and is formal. It's separate from a criminal and administrative investigation, but allows folks to come together to review the incident and think about identify training gaps or training deficiencies and work on a sort of a mitigation plan, if you will. And then finally, the other bucket that we looked at was in the area of hiring and recruitment. The data shows that the Reno Police Department does not reflect the demographics of the officers, does not reflect the greater Reno community. And first of all, the Reno Police Department does not publish the demographic data on its officers. And so that was actually one of the recommendations that we offered in our report. And in talking to folks and across the agencies, it does seem as though there is significant attrition or drop-off between the time that folks pass the minimum membership requirements or meet the minimum requirements and the time that they take the physical test. And with respect to Reno, they have some aspects of hiring and recruitment that are very distinct from the other two law enforcement agencies. Reno has a grip strength test as part of the physical exam. And so one of the recommendations that we offered was to consider removing that. We also recommended that, like Washoe County Sheriff's Office, that Reno actually allow applicants to retake the physical exam. Of considerable concern from community members that had been voiced actually before we undertook the report is the fact that Reno has the biodata questionnaire that's included as part of the written exam. And I know there have been ongoing conversations about addressing the biodata questionnaire and potentially removing it. More generally, we recommend, or the report recommended, that the different departments track and review attrition and retention data. Our analysis shows that none of the law enforcement agencies at the time were tracking and reviewing the retention, attrition data either before, as folks move through the officer recruitment process, but also while they were in the force and moved up the chain of command. And so I would love to hear from you where the department is at on some of those recommendations. So I think that's my 10 minutes, and I will turn the floor over to you, Chief Soto.
Thank you, Dr. Brune, for all of those recommendations. And I just want to thank everybody for being part of this. So this Gwen Center report really was dreamed up by Dr. Angie Taylor and Councilman Delgado, as they stated earlier, and I won't stay too long on that topic. But one of the things I'm proud to say is that I was part of this from the beginning. And I agree with Mayor Sheevy and Chairman Lucy in terms of sharing this information. I think this is a great opportunity for us to share some of our accomplishments with our community and with Dr. Brune in the Gwen Center report. So bear with me. I'm gonna go through my points, but there's a lot of them, and it just tells you, or I hope it shows our community how important this report was to us and how much our community and their voice means to the Reno Police Department. So this goes all the way back to 2015 when I was appointed chief. I did have two boards, as Dr. Brune stated. The Chiefs Advisory Board, which is more of a business board. It's more of our business community. And then the Chiefs Impact Panel. The Chiefs Impact Panel has a lot of advocate groups such as the ACLU, NAACP, our faith-based community, a lot of variations of our community. And putting those two boards together and having all those different thoughts and looking at it through so many different lenses really changed our policy and procedure in the Reno Police Department. So in 2017, we rescinded a dated policy on immigration, and we upgraded our policy on impartial policing. And really what it says is officers shall not contact or stop a person merely on suspicion that the person is present in the United States illegally. Officers will not make inquiries into the citizenship status of an individual that has requested police services. All Reno Police are listed online. All Reno Police policies are listed online at renopd.com/general orders. Currently, Latinos represent 25% of our Reno community. So my goal is to ensure that they feel safe. I'm confident that our goal is to protect them, provide their victims resources. We don't ask about immigration status. And I understand that that's a controversial point for a lot of people, but a lot of this is federal and a lot of this is local. And my number one priority is crime in the city of Reno. And, you know, I want to make sure that our Latino population can come to us and give us information without fear of being arrested or deported. In terms of transparency, one of my first priorities was to reestablish the annual report, which we put out every year. And that gives a list of data and statistics for the Reno Police Department. It's a very thorough report. It's a fun report to read if you haven't read it. And I invite all of you to take a look at that. Every year we put out the previous year's report. So 2019, we put out the 2018 report, 2020, the 2019, so on and so forth. We updated community survey questions because for this report, we have to get an idea as to how our department is doing. We measure overall performance, crime fighting efforts, image, safety, and core values. Disaggregated by anonymous or geographic reporting location, ward, income, rate, ethnicity, age, and employment status. So really what we're trying to do is we're trying to reach out to our entire community to get just a real frank idea of how we're doing as a police department. In terms of innovation, in 2018, we established a program called GovQA, which is really an online portal for people to ask for public records requests. On average, at the Reno Police Department, we process about 250 public records requests per week. Now, before the Gwen report was out, people had to come to the station to get those public records requests, and it was time consuming, it was sometimes frustrating, and people just wouldn't do it. So we made that process a lot easier. We also established something called One Box System at the city of Reno, and that's just basically a media line or an information line to where people can call in and report whatever they really want to report to get to the police through a more assertive, it just works better than having to file a report online or have a police officer sometimes respond to your house. Sometimes it has to do with just information. Regional efforts, we established a Regional Citizens Academy consisting of a 5-week program to provide community members with an overview of police topics such as use of force, emergency vehicle operations, force on force, de-escalation, applicable case law as an introduction of local law enforcement to improve this transparency. This has been a huge success in our region, and really what it does is it brings our community and shows us what we do on a daily basis as police officers. And we have conducted at the Reno Police Department race symposiums every single year since I've been chief. So back in 2015, we were having conversations that the rest of the country is having today. We've been doing this, we've got a huge head start. We've been doing this for 5 years. And not only do we do race symposiums where we have uncomfortable conversations, we also have community forums on hot topics such as immigration, as you brought up, Dr. Boone. So we have a lot of community outreach. Probably over the last 5 years as chief, we probably had 20 different forums with our community because we want to hear what they have to say and what they want to know and what their fears are, what their, where they think they can see opportunity for police, and really just having that interaction with our community. In 2017, in terms of training, we instituted an annual Citizen Training Day. That's where we allow our community, our media, our, just a wide variety of our community to come in and train with our officers through an entire training day. So they get an idea of what type of training we go through, and they understand the decisions that sometimes police officers have to make in a very quick amount of time. And it gives them a better understanding of how difficult this job can be. In 2018, we reinstituted crisis intervention, which is a huge thing for our entire department. So our entire department gets 40 hours of CIT training for all sworn officers. That's important in today's, in today's environment because we deal with so much that has to do with mental health. And if you don't have the training, how are you supposed to deal with somebody who's in crisis? So our entire department has that training. In 2020, right as COVID hit us, we also have cultural competency training to train topics such as implicit bias, racial profiling, improved communication in a multicultural community, which is, again, some very valuable training for our entire agency. I talked about the Chiefs Impact Panel. That panel, the Chiefs Impact Panel, was instrumental in assisting with policy creation for body-worn cameras with the Reno Police Department. So we reached out to that community and had them assist us create our policy. And it's very interesting when you sit down and have a conversation with your community about what's important to them in terms of body-worn camera footage and what's important to us. And we saw a lot of differences. And some of the differences that our community brought up, such as when the camera's turned on, when it should be turned on, were very easy technical fixes for us as a police department. And we did that with the assistance of the Chiefs Impact Panel. So I know that was one of the recommendations. In 2019, as Mayor Sheevy alluded to, we adopted here in Nevada, we have what's called an embedded resource officer. And that embedded resource officer is there for officer wellness for our entire department. And that's an important piece in our field in law enforcement today, because police officers, they face challenges too. And it's not fun going to the chief of police or to one of your command officers and saying, hey, I need some help. I need help in this area, or I need help in that area. It's a lot easier to go to one of your colleagues. Officer Castanelli also has great outreach within our mental health system and our, a lot of different areas that aren't just sworn, I guess. So he provides all of those resources to our community action outreach team so that we can share some of those resources that aren't known, immediately known to our entire community. So not only does he help, and he has his degree in social work. So he's a professional. It is we're one of 3% of departments across the nation that has one of these officers, and it's been a huge success. In 2019, we also established a peer support group for officer wellness. Officer wellness, as you know, is a passion of mine, and I think that we've taken some really monumental steps in making sure that our officers are fit not only in body, but also in mind, because that's extremely important when you're going out for calls for service day after day after day. You have to have a healthy mind as much as you have to have a healthy body. So the peer support group and that embedded resource officer have been incredibly successful. In terms of hiring and recruitment, we've done a couple things that have been really successful for us. In 2018, we started bringing our community members. These aren't sworn people. These aren't individuals that work with the Reno Police Department. These are people in our community, people with the NAACP, within our Latino community. And we brought them into our hiring board so that they get to sit down and have these interviews with our potential candidates, because we want to have a department that does reflect our community. And how can we diversify our department better than bringing our community, our diverse community, in to help recruit and hire our police officers? We do that also with our dispatch and victim services unit. We also collaborated with civil service to rescind dated policies. The grip strength that you mentioned earlier, we've taken out of our testing process. When we took the grip strength out, we immediately saw our numbers go up in female hires. In fact, the first academy that we had after we removed the grip strength were half female. That is unprecedented and unheard of at the Reno Police Department. We just weren't getting enough female candidates. We also removed that biographical data tests. That's something that was put in a long time ago that a lot of us today didn't really understand why it was done, but we understood that it was probably instrumental in us not being able to recruit as many African-American applicants or Latino applicants or female applicants, or even, somebody who's a Caucasian that maybe only had, the upbringing of a mother or a father or whatever the case might be. So we completely removed that from our process, which we're very proud of. And then in 2018, we also selected a recruiting and retention sergeant. So we have now a supervisor that oversees and evaluates Reno Police programs, practices, efforts to attract, hire, and retain culturally diverse and competent employees. And I think it's also important for me to mention that if you ever get a chance to meet with our background unit, who you'll meet is a very diverse group of police officers. And I think that's very important to have a diverse background division, so that when these applicants come in and take their tests with the Reno Police Department, they understand that they are reflective of the agency that they're trying to get a job with. So that's very important and something that we're very proud of as well. And then also, finally, in 2020, one of the recommendations that you put forth, Dr. Bruin, was our community action outreach. And at the time, we had 5 community action outreach officers. We doubled that to 10 since the time we did that report. So we added 4 more officers and 1 more supervisor. I can tell you unequivocally, when it comes to community outreach and our CAO team, they are doing an incredible amount of work in terms of community outreach. And it comes in all different shapes and sizes, and it has different looks every single day. But really what they do is they identify troubled areas within our community, maybe troubled neighborhoods, maybe troubled, trends in policing and things of that nature. And we try and find unique ways to work through those areas with our community. And I hope that it shows, our commitment to the community in terms of doubling the size of that unit by doing that for the Reno Police Department. And last, I want to say, and I know I've taken up a lot of time, there's a lot of questions came into me as to how much of this Gwynn report have we implemented at the department, and I can tell you it's a lot. A lot of the recommendations that you recommended to us, we put into place. And there's still some more that we're working on right now, some very easy fixes. But if you think about it, we really started on this. We really started moving on this in 2017 and 2018. And it takes time to put all these programs into place. But we also took it a step further because I think, and no offense to the Gwynn report, they did a fantastic, thorough report, but we even found some areas as we started to implement these where we thought we could even do a better job than what the recommendation was from the report. And that's important to know because when we have these types of reports done, and I've shared this with my colleagues across this nation, when you have these types of reports, it makes you start to think. you have to start thinking about how to police differently within your community. And that's what we got out of this report. And we had some very uncomfortable conversations with Councilman Delgado, Dr. Taylor, yourself, and our community. And that's okay, because it makes us, take a look at what we do. Last thing I want to say is that I am extremely proud of the men and women of the Reno Police Department. They go out there and they work very hard for this community, and they do their best to do a fantastic job, and I think that they do. And I want to make that a point, because we have a really unique relationship with our community. We started community policing back in the 1970s under Chief Bradshaw, before community policing was ever a key word. And it's in our culture. We understand that we have to have this relationship with our community. And we understand that there's setbacks sometimes, and sometimes we need to do a little bit more to fit in with every new generation that comes into our community. But we love our community. I'm very proud of our department, and I thank you so much for bringing all of this to our attention, because I think it made us a better department, and in turn, it makes us a better community. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chief Soto. We appreciate your responses to Dr. Broom and the salient recommendations. We know that there were many more, as you know, as we said earlier. You don't have time to go through the 100 pages of the report, but to pull out those salient recommendations and ask each of our law enforcement CEOs to respond to those recommendations, and yes, where they are. I mean, I'm monitoring the feed a little bit, and people just have questions. And so your willingness to answer the questions is very much appreciated as we go along. And just to remind people, if you have questions, you can send those questions in to questions@reno.gov, questions@reno.gov. I don't believe it's on KTVN, but it is on the Facebook feed. Those are the two places where this is live, not on the Charter channel, but channel 2 and on Facebook Live. Send those questions, not in the chat. I'm watching a lot in the chat, which is okay. But if you want that question to be responded to, and we're going to prioritize those questions that are directly related to information from the report, recommendations and responses, and so on. If we have time, we'll certainly get to other questions. We know there are a lot of questions out there, but for this virtual town hall, we want to focus in on the report and the information that's contained in the report. And if you haven't read the report, you're hearing a lot of it tonight. We certainly want to get to as many questions as we can. So thank you, Dr. Broom. We'll go back to you and go to the city of Sparks.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Taylor. I just want to clarify something for our listeners or viewers on Facebook, just to provide a little bit of context. So the Gwynn Center, as an independent nonprofit policy center, was brought in to use the task force, the President Obama's task force report, and use it as a guide to evaluate and assess and identify gaps in the recommendations in those report against the 3 law enforcement agencies. We submitted the report. We were not in charge of implementation, which is why these conversations, and I'm learning new things about what has been adopted or implemented, because we were not asked to, once the recommendations were issued, to follow through and monitor implementation. So that is why I am asking these questions and learning some great new information. So Chief Craw, I believe you're up next. And I don't know if it's a benefit of having somebody else go first. There were a lot of similarities across the 3 law enforcement agencies. And so some of the questions, there were similar challenges, and so some of these questions will be duplicative, but I think the answers are very specific to Sparks Police. So bear with me. I will say, so again, the first bucket is around accountability and transparency. And if you look at the President Obama's task force report, that really had to do with the collection and then use of data. So what are we collecting? And then more importantly, how are we using it once we collect it? And I will say that kudos to Sparks, because you really have been the leaders in the region for publishing data online so that community members can go and pull down information. At the time that this report was written, Sparks Police was publishing data on arrests and some of the operations. At the time, however, some of Sparks Police's policies were not available online. So I would love to know, where is the department in or at on publishing those policies and any other additional information? The other big recommendation centered around community input. When we did this report a couple of years ago, I think the one thing that, the one point of contention that I heard from several community members was the fact that, unlike Washoe County Sheriff's Office and the Reno Police Department, Sparks Police did not have a formal community advisory group at the time. And I'd heard that many community members had asked for that and thought that was really important to sort of signal community engagement and community participation. So I'm wondering, what progress or what has there been any conversation around standing up a more formal advisory committee? Similarly, to what extent, again, this was a recommendation, to what extent is Sparks Police including community member input in the design of new policies or the review of existing policies? And then finally, also relevant to Sparks Police was this question of immigrant-specific policies. In talking to some of the Latino leaders at the time, I think because there wasn't a formal advisory committee, and because I think some of the arrest data at the time suggested that, I think at the time, Latinos accounted for almost a third of use of force incidents in Sparks Police in sort of a couple of years before the report was undertaken. So I think that those data points generated some concern with the Latino community. So again, what immigrant-specific policies has Sparks adopted, whether it be specific guidance on how when an officer can report someone to immigrant enforcement officials, to what extent are policies and materials on your website in Spanish, and then to what extent are you actually meeting with the Latino community regularly and hosting meetings in Spanish to share information about those specific policies. Moving on to the other bucket of training, again, like Reno Police Department, Sparks Police officers have up to 64 hours of training annually, or at least they did as of 2018. So I'm interested, based on the report, at the time we heard there were gaps in implicit bias training and de-escalation training. So to what extent has the department addressed those trainings? And I know that Chief Socha also mentioned some new trainings, but I do want to emphasize the evaluation of those trainings. A lot of departments do trainings, but what is Sparks doing to conduct an audit or evaluate those trainings to ensure that the implicit bias trainings are actually meaningful and having their intended impact? Again, similarly to Reno, to what extent is Sparks collecting and reporting data around training? So are you in fact tracking the number of hours of use of force training and making those public? Are you reporting the various ratios of less lethal de-escalation tactics training to the lethal tactics training? And then are you reporting the types and the hours of training in impartial policing, implicit bias, cultural competency to the public? The next bucket is internal policy development. So I would have the same question for you. To what extent are you including based on our recommendations, to what extent are you including community input in the policy surrounding the use of body-worn and dashboard cameras? To what extent are you including community input in new policies surrounding the use of technologies and the availability and use of data? And per our recommendation, has Sparks Police considered establishing a serious incident review board? I know that you have an internal review of serious incidents, but to what extent have you implemented the recommendation that there be a formal serious incident review board? And then finally, with respect to hiring and recruitment, one of our recommendations was that Sparks Police adopt the policy of Washoe County Sheriff's Office to allow the police officer applicants to retake the physical test. And one of the recommendations was that Sparks Police also post on your website more information about the hiring process, the recruitment process, along with deadlines and schedules. And finally, one of the recommendations was that Sparks Police tracked and reviewed annually and systematically the attrition retention data as officers move through the recruitment, or candidates move through the recruitment phase, but also once an officer is in the force and as he or she moves up the ranks. And finally, I know one of our recommendations, and I believe one of your stated goals, was to increase the number of community resource officers. So I would love to hear where the department is on that. So with that, I will turn the floor over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Byrne. I appreciate it. And Dr. Taylor and Councilman Delgado, thank you very much for putting this together tonight. You know, the conversations are not easy, and nor are they short term. Certainly we face challenges every single day, and we look to meet those challenges to the very best of our ability. You know, I think when you look at some of the things that the report addresses with the Sparks Police Department, I think there are a couple of threads that run through things. So I might go a little bit out of order, Dr. Broom, with what you brought up, but I think it'll make some sense here. You know, and I appreciate the kudos on the data that we publish. As Councilwoman Bybee mentioned, our website is perhaps not the most robust around. It definitely needs some tweaking and some update and some love, but we do have plans to improve that. We have a number of our key policies online. So if you go to sparkspolice.com, scroll down the page just a little bit, and there's a little box that says public stats and data. If you go into that area, you'll see a number of the things that we're discussing tonight, to include several of our policies, including racial profiling, professional conduct, body-worn camera, use of force, and things along those lines. In other sections, you'll see reports or information regarding the demographics, not only of our community, of our city as a whole, and of our police department. We also publish, there's a number of things there. So if folks would like to take the time and go to that site, I think they'll see that we have made progress and improvements in that area. Historically, we were not very good in that arena. I think it's something that we began to address internally 5 to 6 years ago. We've done a better job. We can certainly always do better. In terms of community input, and this is probably the biggest one, we do not have a community advisory board, but we are looking to change that. That is the number one thing on my list of things related to the Gwynn report. And to the extent of how seriously we take the Gwynn report, I had that report in its entirety pushed to our website. It is also under that public statistics and data tab. Folks can find the report there if they so choose. Additionally, what you'll see me doing and see this department doing in the coming weeks is addressing various sections of that report and updating folks as to our progress. I think during the time that the report came out and tonight, we have made strides in several areas. What we have not done well is communicate those strides. We have not used social media to its fullest effect. We have not used our website to its fullest effect. And quite frankly, I need to be a little bit more in the public eye, addressing things in those forums. And so I think you'll see those things improving in the very near future. It's my intent to form a community advisory board in the very near future. I've reached out to both Sheriff Balaam and Chief Soto, who have been very helpful in giving me some guidance and direction as to how to go about that. And so we look to make those strides here soon. With regard to the design and review of policies, I think that board, once we get it in place, would be an excellent place to continue having some of those conversations. We have some of them, albeit less formally than we would like, with our faith-based leaders, excuse me. And that's one place where we have contact, but we certainly need to open more means and pathways of communication with our community. And we'll be working on that. With regard to immigration specific things and publishing of documents in Spanish, we have worked to make a number of our documents, specifically those related to victims of crime, available in both English and Spanish. We have 2 victims advocates which are embedded within the department here. They both carry quite a caseload. They average around 80 to 90 contacts per month, not only in primary cases, but secondary follow-up and outreach. We work very, very hard to try to make sure that our Hispanic community in particular feels safe in calling us to report a crime or in seeking help. We understand the barriers that exist with that, and we're working hard to overcome it. We have some bilingual officers, but we need to attract, recruit, and retain more. We do offer specialized pay for officers who take a bilingual test, if they so choose. So we have an additional pay draw with that. And we, through the faith-based community, through Dr. Manera and others, we do have some contact with the community. And we think it's good, but again, it could always be much better than it is. Dr. Manera has my cell phone number and has no problems calling it. And you know, we certainly hope again to have more avenues than just him, but that's been a process. Our website is definitely a place where we could improve those sorts of links. You know, we do have, as I mentioned, bilingual officers and bilingual staff in various areas of the building. We also have access to the AT&T language line, so that if people contact our dispatch center and speak Spanish or speak a number of other languages, we can reach out through that line and bring a translator on the line with us to help that person communicate to us, you know, what the issue is when they call us. Each of our officers on the road also has a cell phone. Those are department issued cell phones. They can use those cell phones to make that same contact with the language bank when they arrive on scene. We believe it's a very valuable tool, and we try to use it whenever it's available to us. With regard to the training and whether we track and calculate all of it, we do. It actually is a very time-intensive process. We just went through an audit with Nevada Post, Peace Officer Standards and Trainings. Our review was very solid and very good, and we're proud of that. But again, we can always do better. We have implemented de-escalation training and implicit bias training in accordance with Nevada law. Again, an area where more training would be better. With limited staff and sometimes limited hours, it can be difficult to achieve the goals of the higher numbers of training that we would like to achieve. But what we do is we evaluate our training on a continual basis, not only from input or feedback from our officers about whether it meets what they need on the street, but how else can it be improved? How can the class be improved? Currently, due to COVID, much of our training, we've had to resort to online training. Now, I'm in the middle of taking that training myself, and quite frankly, I find it very good. It is always better in person. It is always more, I think, impactful when you have it in person, and we seek to do that when we can. However, due to COVID, we've been somewhat restrained in that area. With regard to internal policies, Again, I think the Community Advisory Board, when we get that up and running, that will allow us a far greater input for, or avenue for community input, and will be a huge step forward for us. In the hiring and recruitment area, the way Sparks' civil service rules are written right now, they only allow for one physical test a year. I have been having conversations with our human resources department on looking at changing that rule. It is a little bit of a lengthy and cumbersome process, but that conversation has begun. From a data collection standpoint, we're finding that we are only losing 3% of our applicants during the physical test. Part of that was confusion over how the tests were actually performed. So we created small videos that we posted to our social media sites demonstrating how each of those tests is performed. We received massive amounts of hits on those videos, and we're very successful. We think that we took some of the mystery out of what those tests are and how they should be performed. We are looking at having basically like a run with an officer day, if you will, where people could come and take that test ahead of time and see where they stand physically. Can they reach the standards that test requires? We're working through that process in conjunction with human resources, and we're looking to make strides there. In terms of our applicants, of course, we want to diversify our workforce. We have been working very diligently to try to understand where are we missing our community? Where are we falling short? How can we improve what we do? Again, one of the areas that we need to improve on is our website. Not only the department website, but the city website, in terms of making announcements for hiring, getting the information for the process out there, the testing dates, those sorts of things. We did get a little bit creative and reached out to an outdoor advertising company, and they ran ads on their billboard for us indicating that we were hiring. We did see a bump in applications for that, and we would of course look to do that in the future. And we think that will benefit us. So we're trying to be creative with what we have. I can tell you that I, as a law enforcement professional, when I went through college, I obtained a criminal justice and journalism major, but I should have spent more time in advertising, I think. The methodologies of targeted Facebook ads and really intelligent use of our dollars to try to reach out and bring qualified applicants in is something I don't know much about and didn't know much about, but we're learning. We also are working on expanding our hiring net, if you will. We have a very high hiring standard, and in that we require 24 college credits in order to apply with us. We think that's a good thing. We think we see fewer uses of force, fewer problems with our officers. But the problem is the net is not cast wide enough. So we are looking to include more types of college credits, work-related equivalencies, and things of that nature, not to lessen the standard, but to broaden the net in which we cast into the applicant pool. We are also bringing our drug use policy in line with the other departments, and to, again, not a relaxed standard, but I think something that is more palatable to all sides in the conversation. With regard to increasing our resource officers, currently we have 3 officers and a supervisor in that section. We are looking to add a 4th, and that was in fact approved for us in fiscal year 21-22. Currently, the hiring for that specific position is on hold. We currently have 9 vacancies. I had to stop and do the math, sorry. 9 vacancies in our sworn section, and we're working very hard every day to try to bring those numbers up to bring ourselves to full strength. As we do that, with patrol being our top priority, we have to allocate our resources to some degree. So we haven't filled that position as of yet. we have done an enormous amount of work in hiring and backgrounds, and those 3 officers really are tasked with the majority of it. They're also the officers who do much of our community outreach when they go to barbecues and community events. So they have, I think, a good perspective and good information coming back from the community about where we can improve. And we seek to do that on a continual basis. Again, we certainly look to be better than we are. And we have a lot of work to do, clearly. We're people too. Sometimes we get distracted by things. I know for me, it's been a very intense year in terms of 2 things. Really, my 2 main goals were to increase our hiring and the mental health of our people, literally from every corner of the building. And we certainly have faced challenges with that. We have a very robust peer support program. But culturally, law enforcement has not been very accepting of help in the area of mental health. I've worked very hard to essentially make it okay for our people to ask for help. That has been a big step forward. We have a robust peer support team. We participate with the Northern Nevada Peer Support Network, and we look to expand that. But those have been my 2 focuses, but clearly there are areas within the Gwynn report we need to improve, and we will do that.
Thank you, Chief Kroll, for that information. Thank you for the insight and all the work that you've done. I know it was Chief Allen that was part of this, but thank you for jumping in right in and wanting to be a part of the conversation. I just wanted to remind all the viewers out there that we're receiving comments at the end of the Sheriff Balaam's presentation to us. We will now start the FAQ process. So again, I know we're getting a lot of questions. We will start asking those questions in the amount of time that we have appropriated. But with that being said, I'd like to throw it over to Dr. Bruin again with respect to what's taking place with the Sheriff and Washington Sheriff's Department.
Questions at Reno.gov.
Yeah, I'm sorry, at Reno.gov, questions at Reno.gov. If you have questions out there, we're not taking them necessarily right off of Facebook, so go to questions at Reno.gov. Off to you, Dr. Bruin.
Thank you, Councilman Delgado. Good evening, Sheriff Balaam. So looking forward to this conversation. I've got some harder questions for you since you're last. So let me start with, again, the first bucket, which is accountability and transparency, and really has to do, if you look at the Task Force on 21st Century Policing report, really about the use of data. And at the time that we published this report, the Washoe County Sheriff's Office was not publishing any of the information on its policies or data points regarding stops, arrests, any relevant operations data. So I would welcome knowing where the Sheriff's Office is on that particular recommendation on both the publishing of key mission-related policies and then key accountability factors in the operational data. You do have a Sheriff's Green Ribbon panel, and at the time that we had published the report, it was meeting less frequently, we heard, and so I'm wondering whether one of the recommendations was to meet more regularly, more formally, and then also include community input in the review of existing policies or development of new policies. And so would love to know where you're at on that recommendation. And similarly to the other 2 agencies, we also had the recommendation for the Washoe County Sheriff's Office to develop immigrant-specific policies. And as I mentioned earlier, I think at the time that this report was written, there was concern about, across the country, relationship between law enforcement agencies and immigration and customs enforcement. And at the time, there was an ICE office at the jail. I don't know if that's still the case again, but would love to hear what recommendations or policies the Sheriff's Office has put in place to design immigrant-specific policies that include engagement with and meeting with the immigrant community. With respect to the next bucket, which is training, Again, there were specific gaps identified in current training offerings when this report was released, specifically around de-escalation and implicit bias. And there had actually been a report that recommended or called out specifically with respect to Washoe County Sheriff's Office, the lack of suicide training or suicide prevention training for some of the officers at the jails. So I would love to know what steps Washoe County Sheriff's Office has made to address some of those training gaps. And again, if the office is conducting formal audits or evaluations of the training. Similarly to the other agencies, and again, it goes back to the lack of data that's being reported. Would love to know any of the steps that the Sheriff's Office has taken to both track and report the different hours of use of force trainings, de-escalation trainings, the ratio of less lethal tactics to lethal tactics, and then also report the hours and the percentage of the deputies that have participated in impartial policing, implicit bias, and cultural competency training. Similar recommendation to around internal policy development, the next bucket, and I've hinted at it before. Again, to what extent is the Sheriff's Office using or engaging community members to review and provide input around specific policies as it relates to the use of body-worn and dashboard cameras, or the use of new technologies and the availability and use of data. And then also, I know that there's an internal review process of serious incidents. To what extent has the Sheriff's Office considered the recommendation of establishing a formal serious incident review board? And a related recommendation is one of the recommendations which I haven't brought up, it was in the report, is that we, in the report, urge ask the law enforcement agencies to consider establishing a multi-agency task force to explore the benefits and costs of establishing a civilian advisory review board. At the time, there didn't seem to be an appetite to look at that. And I'm wondering, given the conversations that are happening nationally around community policing and a civilian advisory review board as a possible recommendation, I'm wondering to what extent the Sheriff's Office has been engaged in conversations to consider to perhaps launch a study to look at the costs and benefits of establishing a civilian advisory review board, as Clark County has also done. And then finally, with respect to hiring and recruitment, I actually do want to take a moment to really applaud the Washoe County Sheriff's Office. In talking to the other law enforcement agencies, you really have been, or your office has been, a leader in thinking more creatively about recruiting and hiring great talent. And so I think you were the first agency that moved to a year-round recruitment process or application process. And you were the first agency to allow applicants to retake the physical test when you saw that that was a significant barrier for a lot of the applicants. So kudos to all the great work that your office has done in extending access for young people to enter or to go through the process. With respect to some of the recommendations, similarly to Reno Police Department, the Sheriff's Office doesn't currently publish information regarding the composition of the Washoe County Sheriff's Office deputies, including race, gender, and other demographic data. And so I'm wondering to what extent you've adopted or implemented or considered that recommendation. And then the final recommendation was to track and review the attrition and retention data, both from the candidates, but also with sworn deputies. So with that I will turn the floor over to you, Sheriff Balaam. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Brune. And so first, again, I want to thank Dr. Taylor and Councilman Delgado for hosting this and the Gwynn Center for this report. So when this report was done, I was not in the office, so I came in 2019. So I'll go through some of this as far as when we talk about accountability and our policies. All of those now are published. Unfortunately, kind of like Sparks, our website is a little antiquated, so we're working with the county now. We just are in the process of upgrading that. It should be done by August, but we were able to put all of our policies online. They're now right on our front, WashoeCountySheriff.com. Right on the front page, you can access the PDF form, and it has all of our complete policies on there. As far as when you go into the data points and collection of publishing that. So last year, we implemented and brought back what we call the SOSO, the State of the Sheriff's Office, similar to what Reno and Sparks do. We published that report. It'll be a yearly report that we publish. And so some of that information was in there, and some of it will be going into next year's report. Again, some of the tasks, not to make excuses, but all of us in this region over the last year had to be certified in NIBRS, our National Incident-Based Reporting System. So it took a year for us to train all of our people throughout the region and as an entire state. So the federal government made us go to that mandatory reporting. And so with that, all of us share the same software system, records management system, Tiburon. And when we went to that report, we had to rebuild all of our tables that pull that data. So now that we're certified, we're working on rebuilding those tables, and then in this year's SOSO report, as well as here in the very near future on a quarterly basis on our webpage, we'll be posting all of we're gonna break it down by use of force, because we have the Blue Team, which is an early warning system that tracks citizen complaints, use of force, accidents, and pursuits for all our personnel. We just upgraded that, and we're waiting for them to install it where every supervisor and every deputy will have access to see where they sit in the alert warning system. But more importantly, we'll be able to pull out and then publish on a quarterly basis all of our use of force, our citizen complaints, the type of force that's used by breakdown, and then the race and ethnicity of both either our citizens that we may use it on or the inmates in the detention facility, as well as our deputies. So we're working on that right now with the upgrade. So that'll be coming hopefully, if not in the next couple of quarters, by the end of the year, we should have that all set. Some of the other stuff, again, we're looking on data points is the officer initiated versus calls for service. How many of our officers are self-initiating, whether it's a pedestrian stop, getting out for an area check at the park, a business check, and then just engaging the community versus I get a call from dispatch that says I'm going to domestic violence. So we have that data, and we'll be putting that in, again, our yearly as well as our quarterly. We're building those tables now. And all of that came out of not only the Gwynn Center, but when I came in, part of that was the green ribbon, we changed it. So now it's called the Sheriff's Community Engagement Committee. And so it is a cross representation of all of our community and the diverse community that we have. And so in speaking with those individuals, we started that about mid-year last year, my first year in office. We brought them in, we talked about it. So they've been instrumental in looking at some of our policies. The first part of it was, I think, and Chief Soto hit on it, our Regional Citizens Academy that we started up again. That's critical because I think we realized through all of this, we don't do a good job of communicating. And so a lot of the community thinks, I mean, I've seen it with the police reform, you know, they're emailing our county recorder asking what policies as a county recorder they're making for our law enforcement. So that Citizen Academy is great to show what all three agencies do, what we do as a region, what some of the differences we do between the three agencies, but more importantly, have that two-way conversation. So we've implemented that with both Reno and Sparks. Some of the other stuff about reviewing some of the policies and recommendations, again, that Community Engagement Committee was part of that. But then just 2 weeks ago, again, COVID kind of put a hindrance in there. So we had our first Zoom meeting, and we're going to break off and create a second Sheriff's Advisory Board. And in that board, part of my committee members are going to sit on that, as well as my executive staff and an association rep from both the supervisor and deputies. And we're going to start reviewing policies. We're going to start going over all of our use of forces, our incidents, pursuits, citizen complaints. So that's in the process. I just threw that out to them the other day, and we're going to start meeting monthly. So the community engagement that talks about any of our community engagement, some of our policies, they're going to meet monthly, and then the Sheriff Advisory Board, we're going to start setting up. And then I'll kind of jump ahead for the Citizen Advisory Board. We have not talked about that, but for Chief Soto and now Chief Kroll, once he gets it started, we've talked about bringing our advisory boards, once I get mine up and running, and Chief Kroll gets his, on either every 6 months, every quarter. We bring those boards together to talk about as a region. Because again, we're all different, but we all patrol the same region. So we have had those discussions, and moving forward, we are looking at how we can bring our advisory boards together and have a meeting and go over some of the regional topics that affect all of us and our community. As far as immigration, we do have a complete policy now in our policies that deal with all the immigration type of situations we may run into. With that, we do still have immigration within the detention facility. They have a computer. They sit there. And like when I brought my community engagement, I have several representatives from the Latino community, and they want to know exactly, who are you holding? And we have a contract with the facility for the federal government, not just for ICE, but it's for DEA, FBI, DEA, all of our federal partners. We hold and inmates that may be being transported from one jail to the other or one prison to the other for those federal entities, and ICE is one of them. And what I now have is a report that I can produce at any given time. I produce it for my committee, and it shows exactly on average on that day that they want to know who we have in custody on any type of hold. And for that, it's immigration and why they're here. And what I pointed out to that committee is all the individuals that we're holding are for violent felonies, or the misdemeanor crimes are going to be for your DUI and domestics. And again, I would argue with the community, those are violent crimes. Domestics are our most dangerous crimes. DUIs kill more people on the road. So it's helped a lot with that community, and especially with the Latino community, showing them that report, being transparent. I took them all for a tour. I showed them exactly where the immigration desk is. I tell them that, the inmates get booked in, and then they have a list. And if immigration comes in and decides to go meet with that individual, that's fine. But otherwise, we don't go out and do any immigration sweeps with them. We don't do any of that enforcement action. We leave that to them, and we deal with the local stuff when it comes to immigration. But we do have a policy now that outlines all of that. When we talk about training, a lot of our training, and I have it here, let me grab it, is we have about 832 hours in the academy. And then we have another 40-hour breakout just for the jail detention, and then another 230 hours when they go out to patrol, and then our 24 hours that all of us do every single year. So within that, we do de-escalation. Prior to me coming in, Chief Allen, because of this report, hired a consultant. They came in. They did an implicit and cultural competence lesson plan training course for us, did a train the trainer. So we have trainers within our organization. So we do that every single year. And then when I took office, that's mandatory. And of course, the law changed. So we do it every single year now for our, every single deputy sheriff attends it. And we do implicit bias and cultural competence. But more importantly, what I tell people when you talk about that and de-escalation techniques, not only do we have a specific course, but then we evolve it in what we all call situational awareness training, or SAT training. And that is realistic type training where we can put our deputy sheriffs in scenario-based training with paintballs, where they can do anything from a subject stop to a domestic battery call to, for us, for our detention deputies, we have scenarios where they respond to the visiting lobby and they deal with an individual that may be uncooperative or just be upset. And so we train them on every single one of those de-escalation techniques, any use of force, our implicit bias and cultural competence, to see if they're showing biases as they're dealing. Because what we've found as we've done this over the last couple of years is once you start putting that stress and you put them in those scenario-based settings, their true training will come forward and their habits will come forward. And so we use that to test all of that. And in fact, in this weaponless defense training this year that was developed back in October of 19, we actually, for our intervention, have a role player that goes and uses too much force as a deputy sheriff. And then we are testing to see if our deputies are going to step in and intervene. And if they don't, then we remediate them, we pull them apart, we review our use of force again, which we always do. And so when you talk about all of our use of our lethal versus non-lethal or less lethal training, you can say out of the 24 hours that all of us cover, for us, 4 hours is the range. That's our deadly lethal training. The other 20 is all other training that would be either less lethal, in place of bias, cultural competence, wellness. Wellness is a huge thing. Again, I want to echo what both chiefs have said. I think as a region, we've met with our federal representatives and expressed our concerns to them about mental wellness of our personnel, because we know if they're having issues either on the job or personally in their lives, that spills over into their work life. And the suicides is a big thing. We also have suicide training for our deputy sheriffs and crisis intervention training. So every one of our deputy sheriffs receives CIT training. So they all are certified. And then every year, all of our deputy sheriffs have to go through implicit cultural bias training, as well as CIT training. So they go through all of that every single year, and our SAT training every other year. And then on the off year, they're doing EVOC because we have to do that every 2 years. So we rotate half the agency through. So every 2 years, the entire agency does that. And then some of the other hours we track, so we don't publish or average, and that's something we're looking at of how we can extract that. Is we know there's a lot, and how we evaluate is we send some of our core trainers in, our train the trainers, to evaluate not only our instructors, but that training base, as well as all of the front office goes and attends randomly. We don't have our own individual executive training. We go train with the deputy sheriffs to see exactly how that training is, along with our instructors, make sure it's pertinent, make sure it's realistic. And what we also do is, if there's other training we attend throughout the year, whether it's outside, online, across the street in another state, again, we ask our personnel to do an evaluation on that as well, to see how that training is. If it's something that we want to bring here, we're always looking, because we have the training center across the street, to collaborate with both Reno and Sparks and other entities to bring a lot of that training here, especially during COVID. It's been very difficult. And then on, let me see. Again, when we talk about internal policies, we put them all out. So they're all out on our webpage. And as we update them, we'll continue now, as long as our webpage plays well with us, we will be updating those on a continual basis. And again, when you talk about body-worn cameras, that was something I brought up to my community engagement committee, again, when I talked about the Sheriff's Advisory Board, and asked for their input, so that when we build this board, it's a good representation across the community, as well as our associations, and that we look at these policies when it comes to body-worn, because this for us is very important. And so important that not only did we buy body cams for all of our people, what we call in operations or patrol and detectives, but we now purchased them for our every commission personnel within the detention facility, because we know, although they may be assigned to detention, they go and do transports to doctor appointments. They go to the hospital and do transports. We pull them out for special assignments. So every one of our deputy sheriffs throughout the entire agency now all have or will have body cameras. They're on order for the jail. So those are policies we're looking at. Those are policies we present to this community engagement that I told them moving forward, we want their input along with associations. So they're going to be adamantly or extremely involved, as well as the Sheriff's Advisory Board. And then again, we've been involved with Reno and Sparks on the forums for the last several years, even before I left back in 15. So I believe we had one in 14 and 15 when we had the forums. We continue to be involved in those. We just had besides the symposium, an immigration forum, I believe it was late last year at Dr. Monera's church that we all talked about, because that was a big topic. And we all came together as a region, even our federal partners, to talk about and create that and strengthen that relationship and the bond, because we want all of our Latino or any undocumented immigrant to feel secure, especially if they're being victimized, that they can come forward. And like Sparks and Reno, we have our victim advocates. that are reaching out throughout the various communities. And I asked my community engagement committee again, how else we can be involved. I've kind of lined out as I've educated them over the last couple meetings about what we do. Okay, now that you know somewhat what we do, how else can we better? And here's some of the recommendations that came out of this report. As far as internal peers, so we have a formal process. The policy is about done. So we're going to call it our major incident review board. We had it years ago. We're bringing it back. It will be formal. So again, this will be over all major accidents, major use of forces, major citizen complaints, pursuits. So that board is almost in place. We're working on it now with the policy of how that works, and then they will review all policies or incidents that occur when it comes to any of those 4 categories. And then when it goes to hiring, you know, some of the things when you track attrition, I want to say the one thing we don't do is anybody that gets washed out from the time of the written until right now we went to an online system, so make it a lot easier. So people traditionally, if you wanted your packet, so you pass a written test, we got your names from Human Resources. We then said, hey, you passed the test, come pick up your packet. They had to come up here. So we went online, so now it's all online. So we don't ask any race questions. So the one thing is if once they fill out that questionnaire, if there's mandatory rejection criteria, i.e. they've been arrested for a domestic that we can look at, they used drugs within the, you know, major drugs that would mandatorily disqualify them. We don't track them because we don't know what race they are. They just are automatically eliminated. Now, the one thing that we're starting to look at, and I've been meeting with our human resource representative and our backgrounds, is how do we track from the time we first meet, the background investigator meets that applicant face to face. That's when we really know by looking, you know, what race or ethnicity they are. How from that point until they go through, and we implemented an interview board where we bring outside citizens to sit on that board. So as the applicant is going through the process, once they do the background and we do the CVSA or polygraph, we do CVSA here, they go to an interview process. And so that panel brings everybody in. We brought citizens that sit on that panel as well, so they can have input, and they ask those exact questions about implicit bias, cultural competence, you know, why do you want to be a law enforcement? So that's part of the testing process we've now implemented to be more transparent and include the community so they can see exactly who we're trying to pick as great deputy sheriffs for this community. And then as far as the race and gender, we did not publish that, but we have it. We just did, I did with Deputy Chief Vin Zahn the other day, a town hall with Colo, and we gave him that demographic, a breakup of our county as well as for the sheriff's office. So that will now be on our SOSO every year, as well as every quarter. And then I've been meeting regularly since I took office again with our human resource about how we can continue, because it's not just about checking the box. You know, if you talk to any of the minority communities, if they say, well, okay, you know, the Latino community is 25%, we reached it, check, we're diverse. That's truly not diverse. Diverse is really integrating into the community, making sure whether it's our backgrounds, making sure if it's our front office, throughout our entire ranking structure, both the civilian and commission side, that we reflect our entire community. So that's one effort we've been working on with human resources and our testing process of how do we get more diverse? How do we encourage those that may, for deputy sheriffs, you know, all of us start in the jail. It takes about 5 years to go to patrol. And then if they want to be a detective, it takes a couple more years. So how do we encourage them to get that experience? But more importantly, for those that may be in the minority communities, to go to what they maybe as a career goal have wanted, but then start to test to diverse through the ranks, because we need that diversity. So we're working on that with human resources and going around and doing, we created, or we're in the process of creating a mentorship program. So if we identify deputy sheriffs, and on the civilian side, same thing, that are up and coming leaders, how do we have the various ranks reach out to them, encourage them to test, bring them into meetings, teach them about the budget, teach them about administrative functions, so that we can start building that cadre of individuals that are not only diverse, but are, when they're ready, they're already, you know, they have that experience. So I think I've hit on everything that you asked.
Thank you so much, Sheriff Bala. I'm turning it over to you, Dr. Taylor and Councilman Delgado.
Thank you very much, Dr. Broom, for all of your work and for the study and all of the resources that you put into this. It's really important for our community. And thank you to our law enforcement executives for your willingness to share data, share information. And now we're going to get down to some of the nitty gritty. We have a plethora of questions that have come in to questions at reno.gov. Again, if you have questions at reno.gov. Councilman Delgado and myself have been going through them, writing down themes and combining questions as we can. We want to get to as many of these as we can. We have people here, of course, the law enforcement executives, us from the state of Nevada, from the city of Reno, from the city of Sparks, from Washoe County. And so we really want to put all of these resources to work. So I'll go ahead and jump into these questions that we're hearing. We're certainly looking at those first that we've heard the most. And a theme that we've seen in all of these questions that have come up, and I'm going to just put this just as an overall kind of umbrella, if you will, is the community has a strong desire to build better trust, for you to work to build better trust to all of our law enforcement agencies. So with that in mind, we're going to begin with some of those questions related directly to that. And I'm going to start to the question and comment that we had by far more often than any other question, and that is questions on the shooting of Mr. McKiley in Sparks, Nevada. So Chief Carl, I'm going to throw this to you. Not comments on the shooting per se. I understand it's an investigation, but when will the findings or the video, the body cam, the dash cam be released? This is going to be a multi-part question, so I'll start with that, Chief Carl, if you would.
Sure. I think just for a little bit of information for folks, if they don't know, there is a regional OIS protocol that has been in place.
Describe OIS, just so that they'll know.
Yes, ma'am. Officer involved shooting. There are multiple goals, obviously, within that protocol, two of which are, A, to have an incident investigated by an agency that is not involved, and number two, to produce a thorough report. I believe all of us, Sheriff Balaam, Chief Soto, believe very heavily in those tenets. The public demands it, they deserve it, and the detectives that are assigned to those investigations work very, very hard to provide that. With respect to this specific case, I don't know exactly when the findings are going to come out. What happens when that report is produced is it goes to the district attorney's office, and the district attorney makes a review of the report, which in most cases is 1,000 pages or more, and he then issues his findings. We do, however, hear the demands of the public with regard to release of videotape and things of that nature in general. We are working to improve the protocol within its existing framework and find better ways to provide the transparency that the community is demanding. We hear it, we understand it, it isn't lost on us. We're working very hard to try to come up with something better.
Well, I appreciate that, Chief Carl, because that, again, the thing that we've been asked on our questions more than anything else, but I want to go a little bit deeper on that, and this can be answered. Let's just go to Chief Soto. I believe I saw a comment most recently from you, and there, I mean, it's been over 6 months since that shooting, as you know, and the comment and question that we have more than anything other in this issue is, how long should it take? I mean, certainly I am absolutely respectful of the officer involved shooting protocol. I'm aware of it, and you certainly shouldn't investigate your own shooting. So I understand that absolutely, Chief Carl. But if you're a member of the public, and even if it isn't your family member, but if it's your family member, and then 6 months later, and there was just a report released on the shooting that happened in 2018. And I mean, that's to a community member, that is absolutely unacceptable. And I'll be honest, if that was my family member, oh, we'd be turning over tables and stuff. We'd be on the news. I mean, so I say that realistically, if that's your family member, why should it take 18 months for me to find out what happened and for me to see the tape? So can you help the community understand why does it take so long, and when is that going to be looked at so that that timeline can be shortened, especially the frustration when you see it in other parts of the country when the tape comes out in 2 days?
Thank you for the question. Am I unmuted here?
No, we can hear you, Chief.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a difficult question, but I'm going to answer it as raw as I can. It depends on the case. It depends on the case. It depends on how many witnesses we have. It depends on how many different interviews we have to do. Keep in mind, when we do one of these investigations, they're criminal investigations. So a lot of the information that we gather is extremely important for the family of the deceased. And that's something that we don't get to talk about a whole lot, but we have to protect the integrity of that investigation, both for the family of the deceased and for everybody that's involved in the situation. You heard me when I talked about, I don't know, a week or so ago, where I said 2 years is too long. I've been having these conversations with our community for 20 years now, because it's too long for not only the families, it's too long for everybody who's involved in this type of investigation. So we have certainly had conversations, myself, Sheriff Balaam, and Chief Kroll, on expediting those information or those investigations on the front end. So I can only speak for the law enforcement piece of it. And I can say that we have shrunk that timeline. I want to say that that particular case was about 5 months on our investigation. And that's people might not want to hear it, but that's a fair amount of time to do a thorough investigation. Once that investigation's done, it moves over to the district attorney's office. Our district attorney has really changed the way he does his portion of the work. And as somebody stated too earlier on the show, it's a large binder essentially of what occurred that day, and it's very transparent. So it's going to be very clear and very clean as to what occurred. So to give you an exact timeline, I can't give you an exact timeline. 2 years, in my opinion, in my professional opinion, is too long. 12 months, when you're talking about the judicial system and all the work that goes into it, I know that's a long time. I know that's a long time for a family. It's a long time for an officer that's being investigated. But, that's about average. And that's if we're working on, like I said, this one was done in a pretty timely manner. So you figure 5 months on our end and then the district attorney. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, as a follow-up with that, thank you again for answering the question as truth and as apparent as you can. To that point, we here in Northern Nevada see ourselves as family. We often refer to ourselves as regional partners, as looking out for one another. With that being said, for the integrity of the department where we are currently in the environment that we are, how do you feel, or how do any of you feel, and if you give me a 2 or 3 minute answer because we're running out of time here, is how do you feel about an outside entity investigating these officer-involved shootings? People often say, Sparks, Sister City, cousins, Foster County, the same thing. Are we too close of a family here, good or bad, in order to make sure that there's full transparency and auditing of an officer-involved shooting? Can you elaborate for me or what your thoughts are behind that?
I can answer that for myself. I can't answer it for the other agencies. But it is a question that I've been asking myself, is where does the trust start? Obviously, if it's an involved agency, as all of our region understands, it's not appropriate for us to investigate our own shootings. Now, we used to do that, okay? So it kind of tells you the direction that we've moved. Now we have an outside agency investigate that, and then it goes to the DA's office. So where does that oversight start? I've had conversations with Senator Ford about where that trust starts. I think that's probably going to be, there will be some discussion on that in future legislative sessions. But where do if Vegas came down and did an if I knew that it was somebody outside of this region, I personally, it is what it is, especially nowadays with body cameras and a lot of the technology that we have. I mean, as long as it's a competent agency, and I'm not saying that Sparks and County aren't competent. They're extremely competent. But I understand what it looks like to the community and that they have questions on that piece. And I'll let Sheriff Balaam and Chief Kroll answer to that further.
So I'll jump in if you don't mind, Pete. On that, from the sheriff's office, I'd agree with Soto. I think for us, Oscar, I think our men and women do a great job as it is. We have some great detectives, and we make sure that those individuals doing the investigation are not part of the shooting. So it's from the other two entities, or where we've had multiple agencies shoot, we make sure that, you know, the lead investigator is from an agency that does not. And then ultimately that is sent to the DA for that review process, and the DA has the ultimate call. So I think our men and women are doing a great job. But what I can tell you, and Chief Soto and Chief Crawl kind of already touched on it, what we do recognize is what the citizens of our community want, and that is maybe not the complete investigation, because our deputies and officers have the same rights as everybody else. And we got to make sure we adhere to those rights. But we can provide them a brief, and you saw it from Sparks PD. They did it last week with one of their shootings. And we're working on shrinking that timeline, like Chief Soto said, to where within the few weeks after the shooting, that shooting agency involved would come out, provide a brief, and show a body cam if there was body cam there, so that we start building that trust with the community. I think that is something we've all sat down, we've met, we're meeting on a continual basis, hopefully here in the very near future. That will come out, and I think that's a huge step for the community, that within the first couple of weeks of a shooting, that agency can come out, they give a brief, as an example of what happens down south. Any video that's available, they'll show a video. You know, if there's 10 body cameras there, you know, they will show the best video that's possible. And then give a synopsis, just the basic facts of what the situation is, and that now we're leading the investigation through outside entities. That'll go to the DA, but at least we are transparent and show the community within the first few weeks what's gone on.
Thank you, Sheriff. And Chief Crawl, my apologies. We have 5 minutes left. I want to give the opportunity for those that are viewing us on KTVN to at least ask another big question that we received your commentary from. We're asking the question is people's thoughts on defunding the police. That's across the nation, here regionally. Thoughts about what defunding police means to you, what it means to your agency, what it means about trust with the community.
And KTVN might be off.
So Chief Crawl, I'll throw it to you first. And also for those viewing us, that if KTVN leaves us, continue following us on Facebook. We have a few more minutes. There's tons of questions. Again, Chief Crawl, with respect to defunding police.
Thank you, Councilman. I appreciate it. You know, I find this a very interesting discussion. My first and natural reaction is to kind of retract from it. But, you know, law enforcement has been tasked with a great many things. Many of them are social-based issues. Sometimes we may not be the best answer. And I think when people think about defunding the police, you need to understand what we have locally. Programs like the MOST program that we talked about, that is not a program that the Sparks Police Department funds. We are able to utilize the people in that program because Washoe County funds it. We simply have established a collaborative partnership amongst the agencies to utilize that program to bring better services to our citizens. We understand the importance of it. We understand the need for it. So we have tried to be as creative as we can be and be good stewards of the taxpayers' money to bring the best services available to each and every call that we can.
You want me to talk on that, Mr. Delgado,
Sure.
Councilman Delgado?
Thank you, Chief Soto.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just, so my thought on this is it's a real tricky thing. It's not, we have a responsibility and a duty to keep our communities safe. The city of Reno is 250,000 citizens. We've got 330 cops, which is about 1.3 to 1.4 per thousand, which is way below the standard. And a lot of that has to do with our tax base and our tax structure. So defunding the police in terms of officers, we can't do that. We have to keep our community safe. But what I will say, and again, it's something that I've been preaching for a long time, is we do need to look at some of these responsibilities that police officers are given, such as homelessness, such as mental health, those hot topics that, you know, sending a man or a woman with a gun around their belt to deal with somebody when they're in crisis might not be the best answer that we're looking for. So how do we do that? Well, we have to have more money and we have to have more resources. You know, and again, that's something that's going to have to be addressed. We've been underfunded on those types of things like mental health and homeless now for as long as I've been with the department, but really it has shown in the last 10 years, the last decade. It used to be that I would respond to somebody with a mental health crisis maybe once a month. Now it's every single day. So we need professionals. We need professionals dealing with people that have mental health crisis or that have homeless challenges. And we need to start looking at funding those resources. So that's I guess the defunding piece that you talked about is city revenues grow. They always grow. And I would not be opposed to some of that growth going towards some of these programs. That's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing in law enforcement. It's not a bad thing for our community. I think overall it's a good thing. So I hope that kind of helps that question. We need cops. We have to have a safe community. We have to. We respond to 250,000 calls a year with 330 guys and gals. So we need those. We need those people. But we also need people to help out with homelessness and with mental health. So I hope that helps.
Thank you, Chief. It does. And I think that as I look at some of the questions that we've had relating to some of the support that we've used, that police officers have used, especially as you talk about the MOST program, and we're looking at issues when, you know, you have a situation and sometimes they have been shootings when really it's more of a mental health issue than perhaps a law enforcement issue. So to have that support there on the scene to help manage that could save lives. That can certainly save lives. And I know that's the intention of the MOST program. I don't know. There's a question now, just quickly, if you can just quickly answer this one, Chief Carl, was the MOST program as, and you may know this yourself, Councilwoman Bybee, you mentioned the MOST program as well. How often is that used, and was that used in the case of any of these most recent shootings that may have happened?
Dr. Taylor, if I may, just real quick, the MOST program, so for people who don't know, these are licensed clinical social workers that ride along with officers during their patrol shift. This program was started at the Reno Police Department with Officer Steve Johns and Pat O'Brien way back in the day, and they deserve all the credit in the world. We leaned over and stole it from them, and the program has continued to expand. Unfortunately, we don't have enough workers to be either in every car or on every shift. The program has expanded from the Reno Police Department to the Sparks Police Department, and now to the Sheriff's Office in their patrol and in the detention facility as well. The availability of the workers is crucial, and what we're trying to do is hit as many pockets as we can with the resources that we have. I would love to see it increased. One of the things in the President's executive order talks about co-responder programs like this, and I would love to see, I'm with Chief Soto, and I'm sure Sheriff Balaam, would love to see increased funding and have more things like this available to us all.
Thank you, Chief. I just circled this back a little bit to Councilwoman Bybee. I know that you mentioned that the MOST program, and I know that there isn't a lot of funding right now because of COVID and so on, but is that something on the radar of the Sparks City Council?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the city, as a council member, but as a regional, sitting on so many different regional boards and looking at everything from our homeless issue to I mean, the mental health component in our community and in our country is a huge issue and challenge that there have never seemed to be enough resources, period, across the spectrum for mental health services for addressing those issues. And this MOST program has been so successful that I absolutely would love to see it expanded. Unfortunately for all of us right now, with the economy because of COVID, Nevada is facing the largest deficit, more so than any state in the country. So all of us are looking at our individual budgets where we were moving along pretty well. And now we've been dealt this blow with our major shutdown of our major sources of income and, you know, C-tax and everything. So I'm hoping that's very short term. It's not something that would be off the table, but absolutely, as we can find funds or we can work with foundations and grants and other funding for mental health services, I think it's critical across the board.
Thank you, Councilwoman Bybee, for answering that. Another question that we received a lot about is our regional law enforcement's relationships with ICE. And I know Sheriff Balaam, you have touched on that a little bit. Again, can you clarify what that relationship is? Do you have the opportunity to ask ICE to move outside of the Sheriff's Department? I know that's a question that's usually asked to me. Again, it's out of my jurisdiction. Another one is also with respect to what are the visitation rights for those that are in detention that are immigrants?
Perfect. So real quick back to the defund, so I can throw my 2 cents in there as well. We need that, and I think what Chief Soto hit on perfectly was, we've asked law enforcement to put on a lot of hats over the years, so they've been, I'm good. So they've been asked to do a lot when you talk about homeless, when we talk about mentally ill, and so that's one thing, with the Detention Services Unit, we brought in outside entities to help with that so that individuals don't stay in our jail, because we know there's some that's where they end up because there's nowhere else to put them, and that's the wrong mentality. So actually today I met with Dr. Martin, or spoke to Dr. Martin from UNR, who oversees the social working program, and we're going to start an intern program both in the jail and outside, so that they may not be fully certified social workers, but they are going to be interns that'll be riding along both within the jail and in patrol, so that'll increase our staff. And I know she's reaching out to the other entities as well, because that's one area that both the executive order and I know locally we've all been talking about. When it goes to immigration, our relationship is, again, we allow them a computer down in our detention facility. They have, it's not tied into our database. It is tied into the federal database. They get a list that they can pull, like anybody else can pull, who is booked into the facility. It's public information. They go through there and they determine, based upon the federal guidelines, who they want to interview or who they don't. We don't tell them who to interview. We don't flag anybody. When they get booked in, they go right as if you were a citizen of the United States. They don't know any different. They have their own process that they double check, and then they will go back and talk to that individual. If they want to put a hold, what we changed about 8 years ago under Sheriff Haley, so 2 sheriffs ago, is they have to go get a warrant. So they go to the courts, they get a warrant, then they bring that warrant back, and then we put a hold on, like if you had a warrant and we arrested you for anything else. Other than that, on the outside, we don't work with ICE. We don't go do sweeps. Now, if they were doing something and called a 1078, and I won't speak for Reno and Sparks, but I would imagine it's the same response. If they needed help, we absolutely will go help quell whatever situation they're in. But on a regular basis, our relationship on the outside is they do their federal immigration, and we do all of our local jurisdictional enforcement.
Thank you, Sheriff, for that. A direct question is, what are the rights of those immigrants that are in at par in terms of visitations or other things? I'm hearing mixed messages for clarity for the community. Thank you.
Absolutely. So they have the same rights, and actually they have, when it comes to visitation, unless they're in transit. Now, I'll try to make this short because I know we're running out of time. An in-transit individual is somebody that's going from one jail to another. So they may be going from, let's say, California to Idaho. If they stop here overnight, they are not allowed a phone call, because that would jeopardize the safety of that transporting agency. And it may not even be a law enforcement agency, it may be a contractor. So if they're here for the night, they're not allowed phone calls, because we don't want to jeopardize the safety of that transportation going from point A to point B. But if they are being booked in here, they are allowed the same visitation, same phone calls that anybody else. And then as far as the housing, what I think most people don't realize is we have to have an audit every year by ICE, and they are required to have more rights than our normal inmates. So when it comes to how much time out of their cells, how much access to materials, law material, there is a lot of specific stuff that wouldn't roll over into another inmate that they actually have in the jail.
All right, thank you for that, Chief. Sheriff, thank you for going back to directly answer that question. I have another question that's come up often on our list of questions, and it's this. A request for the cities of Reno, Sparks, and Washington County police departments to make a commitment to release release the records on an annual basis, I would imagine, release stats. And some of this came up when you were responding to Dr. Broom's recommendations on police training, the policies and spending to the public, in addition to those stats on internal affairs. I guess I just quickly, if I can hear from all three of you on that, because they didn't specify the question, which agency. So we're going to make that broad. Came up several times.
I can start on this one, Dr. Taylor. Yeah, so we do release those stats in our annual report. We do release those stats in our annual internal affairs report, which are put out annually. But you know, I understand that. Well, there's two paths forward, at least for the Reno Police Department. One is we've changed our standards federally on how to report under a system called NIBRS, and NIBRS is a much more detailed report process that we have to give to our federal partners in terms of uses of force and things of that nature. But I also think that we can do a better job, and it's one of the things that we've been working on since this GWIN report, in terms of getting reports of use of force, just types of crime reports, things of that nature in a more regular fashion on our website. Because that's not information that we want to hide from. Again, it's one of those, it is what it is. So we do release it a couple times a year, but I think we can do a better job at making that even somewhat more regular. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Chief Crawl, or perhaps the sheriff, would you mind responding as well? Just keep it tight, because I know we're running over time here a little bit, but we want to get as many of these questions that came up, these themes that are coming up. Just what's your thoughts, and can you make that commitment to release that data on an annual basis?
Oh, I think we can certainly do a better job than we've been doing. You know, one of the places we invest heavily is in the training and career development of our officers. And, you know, unfortunately, sometimes during times of tight budgets, that's one of the places that we turn to, you know, it's one of the places that takes a hit, long story short. We want to be more transparent. We want to be more accountable for our folks. We just need to compile the data and make it a little more readable than what we have on our website now. And we can certainly move in that direction.
Thank you, Chief. Sheriff?
So yes, we will be doing that annually. And then more important, I think the same thing the two chiefs said, we can do a better job. So as we mentioned, now that we have that NIBRS report and we're getting all used to that and building those tables, we'll do that more on a quarterly basis as well.
Thank you, Sheriff. Councilman?
Thank you all for sharing all of that information. I know these questions, we're trying to rapidly shoot them. I know we're running out of time, so appreciate you guys' short answers. Another question that we've been receiving is, maybe this is directed to both the Sheriff's Department, City of Reno. I know Sparks is in the process of developing citizen advisory boards, but questions that have been brought up, and I'm a huge proponent and supporter of saying, let's get people involved and engaged. Oftentimes, boards and committees have people sit on these boards and committees for years and years and years, and there's no term limits. And so what's been the turnover? What's the outreach? What's the recruitment of some of these boards? And in order to hear new ideas and so forth. Chief Soto, then I'll go to Sheriff Bale.
Thank you, Councilman Delgado. I know you and I have had a couple of these conversations, and I agree that the makeup of these boards needs to change regularly. I can tell you that we have people coming in and out of our boards at a somewhat regular pace, but there is a need, and there is some good. There's some good that comes out of a historical perspective, meaning somebody who's been in this community for a long time, that's been an advocate for a long time and understands the history of Reno. But I also know that as I get older, everybody in our town gets younger. And I know you and I have had conversations about bringing youth onto our boards. I know that on both of my boards, I have new members that are, I suppose you could say, of a newer generation, and I'm not opposed to always taking a look at that and bringing unique perspectives. I agree. I think it's super important to hear from our community, and I appreciate those suggestions.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We want to get as many of these questions as we can, and they are flying in. So I'm going to move in. Just speaking of boards, and groups and committees that sometimes don't rotate. A really common question that we were asked tonight is will you commit to, or just, let me put it this way. I'll say it in my own words. What are your thoughts on moving from an advisory board to a review board? That has come up second only to the Mackay question time. So I would ask each of you just quickly, what are your thoughts on that? Not asking for a commitment. I know there's a lot of work involved in that, and I know that there are mixed results depending on perspective and so on. But just what are your thoughts on that, initiating the review board?
So also, I think for us, it's Sheriff's Advisory Board first. I think kind of what Chief Soto said, we need to bring the youth. It has to be a great cross-section of our community, bringing them in with the association. So for me, it's establishing that Sheriff's Advisory Board, where we're going to go over those and we're going to present. And again, it'll be up to the board once we get it rolling. Those 4 categories you want to meet every month, and we'll give them a synopsis. Again, there's certain things we can't release because of the Peace Officer Bill of Rights, but there's certain things we can as far as a synopsis without names and get their input for training and policies. So for me, that's what it's about, is the Sheriff's Advisory Board and moving to that first and looking at what Chief Soto and I have talked about of bringing them together as a region, on a quarterly or every 6-month basis.
Thank you, Sheriff. Either Chief, Chief Carl, you're unmuted. Yes, sir.
I think for us at the Sparks Police Department, it's going to be Citizens Advisory Board first, primarily because I want to open those avenues of communication, and we have the wheels to that going a little bit. I'd like to start a good foundation there and have that conversation, and then look at moving forward once we're on a little bit more solid ground with first board.
Thank you. Chief Soto, what are your thoughts on your review board, oversight board?
Yeah.
On those
I personally like advisory boards, but let me tell you about review boards and where the challenge really comes in terms of research and different agencies that I've had the pleasure of working with over the past 20 some odd years of my career. Is they're very difficult to, a review board is extremely difficult to staff. It puts a lot of cases in kind of a limbo state where officers are off for a certain amount of time. It's just a very difficult thing to do. There is a Peace Officers Bill of Rights that dictates what we can and what we can't do. And I've found a lot of success with our community, through our community, in taking a look at policies and procedures and working with them and through issues with that. Review boards are much more tricky. They're very difficult to put forward, and that's why we haven't done it.
Thank you, Chief Soto. I know we have State Senator Julia Ratty with us, former City Councilwoman for the City of Sparks. I know you had your hand up there, so let's go to you. I know you may have some insight regarding session and legislation.
Thank you, Councilman, and thank you, Dr. Taylor. I appreciate the opportunity to participate. I just wanted to be here mostly to listen to the conversation and support the work that you all are doing. I did just want to make a couple comments from the legislative perspective on some of the conversation that has happened this evening. First of all, the legislature, the state of Nevada has a significant chunk of money in the game on the most teams. There have been increases from the Nevada legislature in most funding down to the local level in both 2017 and 2019. Now, again, has been noted here many times, there's a pretty challenging situation at the state. And so if those are programs that people care about, they should probably be letting their legislature know, because while I think it was referenced that the county is funding that, really it's a lot of state money that flows through to the county and then is used in the community as a whole. So most teams have been a big priority for the state legislature. Second, I just wanted to note in 2017, due to the good work of Attorney General Ford, we did pass the body cam legislation. And that is the reason we have body cams so universally used in our agencies in Northern Nevada. Now, again, is there some tweaking, that it's been a couple of years, we have some experience with it now. So there may be the need to revisit some of that in the legislative session, but that is something that I want to give Attorney General Ford, when he was a state senator, credit for in the legislature for moving that. And we can continue to improve upon that. And then finally, I just wanted to note, there was a bill passed in the 2019 session that is specific to making sure that there's significantly more training on many of the issues that were brought up today. And I appreciate that we're starting to get some action towards implementing some of the aspects of that bill. And I think, as has been acknowledged here today, there's more that could be done. But we have done funding for behavioral health services, working with police, body cams, and that mandating some of that training. Last thing I want to point out is just not everybody knows that we're a part-time legislature. So we're a citizen legislature with most folks have a day job, and we go down to Carson typically every other year for 120 days. And so your opportunity to really make a difference on some of these issues, if you want to get statewide law, is typically from February until June every other year. And this upcoming year will be a legislative session. So if you want your legislature to take action on some of these issues, that's the opportunity. But we're also probably going to be having a special session up here relatively quickly to deal with some of the budget crisis. I think there will be an opportunity to make some progress on some of the items that the community has been asking for. So I would pay attention to the news in the next couple weeks, because I think you'll learn more about the special session. We won't be able to do everything. Those special sessions are usually pretty small and narrowly focused, but I do think you'll see some action. So I encourage folks to communicate with your legislators. I know my inbox has been full, but keep up that pressure if there are changes that you want to see. And thank you for letting me be here and letting me have just a minute.
Thank you, State Senator Ratty. Appreciate all your hard work and advocacy, constantly out in the community and constantly advocating on behalf of your constituents and all constituents across the state. I want to add the question to anyone can answer this one is, there's been conversation related to trust and what does that mean? As part of this has been a constant question about a third-party verification and someone auditing. The Gwynn report is now coming up on 2 years old, 3 years old. Which is relatively young with the perspective of plans being done, especially in-depth reports such as this one. Would you guys be open to a third-party verification or auditing to make sure that implementations are taking place with, of course, the addition of new best practices such as a can wait or other best practices that we start to see present themselves across our nation?
So, what I would say to that is we already have our third party, and that's Nevada Post. They come and audit. And I believe Chief Soto's the chair, so he can speak more about it. But that entity also certifies, they give all our training, as well as anything else, better recommendations. So I think we already have that, and it's appointed by the governor. So I think we already have that body, and they audit us on a regular basis. Chief Soto.
Yeah, Post does audit peace officers across the state. And in addition to that, we're also audited by a lot of our federal partners. Earlier, we brought up NIBRS, which is a reporting system, and making sure that we appropriately, report our use of force and different types of calls for service, all types of calls for service really now. And that is audited every year as well. And that's about the most comprehensive audit that you can really go through as a department. It takes us it's a constant, battle getting them that data. But to speak about trust, Councilman, I think that has to do with what we're doing right now. And that just means we just have got to continue to go out, have conversations with our communities, have symposiums, have forums, have conversations. That's where the trust is, that's where the trust is either made or broke. And we'll continue, you know that I'll continue to commit to do that. I know I'm speaking on behalf of Sheriff Balaam and Chief Kroll, that we're all committed to really reaching out to our community and having these conversations. I think you've seen a lot of significant change just in the past month with law enforcement in general, particularly in this region. And again, all of that is to establish some of that trust that you're talking about. I understand that, that's the biggest piece. That's what we, that's what we have to do. And I want people to when they're around a police officer, to feel safe. I don't want them to feel any other way. And that just means continued community outreach. Thank you.
And I would like to just echo what the sheriff and Chief Soto said. Really it starts with each and every interaction that we have with the public, each and every time we have it. Not only when you call our dispatch center, when the officer arrives to come help you or deal with your call for service, that's where it starts. Our officers are our greatest ambassadors. We look for them to uphold the high standards of the Sparks Police Department. I think if we can continue to do that, along with having these types of important and difficult conversations, that's crucial. We need to continue to do that. We need to find more avenues to do it. And we look forward to being a part of that conversation because we are committed to it at Sparks Police Department.
Thank you very much, each of you, for answering that question and sharing the rule of post. The implementation is really, really important, and Dr. Broom spoke of that. We only have a few minutes left. We're going to end this at 7:30. We're already 30 minutes over, and thank you, KTVN, for staying with us, and all of you on who continue to follow us on Facebook Live. This is going to be recorded and posted on YouTube. We'll get that information out as well for anyone who may have missed it and wanted to be a part of it. Also, there are a couple questions real quick. Dr. Broom, can you talk a little bit about the focus groups that you utilized when you did the study? And then I have another question that, from a follow-up standpoint, that was asked a couple of times.
Yeah, so we organized a series of focus groups as well as individual interviews with different communities or members of the community up in northern Nevada over the course of the study, which took place over 12, 15 months.
It did. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Broom. A couple of things. Mayor Sheevy had a family emergency. She told me about it earlier, but she wanted to be on the call. I mean, on the Zoom, on the forum, but she told me she may have to get off. She actually stayed longer than I thought she was going to be able to. So, Mayor, thank you. And our thoughts and prayers are with you and your family. A final question, as we begin to wrap this up, and then I'll throw the Councilman Delgado as well, is questions on HR tracking. Dr. Broom mentioned that she recommended, that the agencies work with your HR just on looking at your numbers for recruiting and retention. And it was asked if that is going to be tracked going forward. That came up a couple of times as well. And this is probably, each of you talked about your diversity recruiting plans and whatnot. So will there be some tracking on that? Was something that showed up a couple of times.
I can tell you, we at Sparks are definitely working on a way to do that. One of the problems that we have found, or that I have learned about recently in working with HR, is that some of that data is not mandatory to fill in. So sometimes when we have an applicant, they opt not to check certain boxes. So it's difficult for us to capture that. We don't want to just use the eyeball test because that isn't verifiable and it isn't a consistent data set. So we're working to try to find a better way to capture that information so we can address the issue.
Thank you so much. Either of the other two want to jump in from a tracking standpoint?
I'll just make ours real quick. We've come up in the last 3 years. We have a much more complex tracking complex in terms of retention and data. We have a pretty good. In fact, some of that we shared, I know publicly, and we'll continue to do that. I think it can always be refined, but I think we're getting better and better at it as time goes on. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Real quick, same thing that Chief Soto said. We're tracking most of that now, and so we'll make sure that we publicize that. That's the only thing we haven't done. So we'll work with HR so that that's included in our yearly, as well as when we start producing all the other stuff quarterly, we'll put that information out as well.
Thank you. Just to circle back real quick, Dr. Broom, the person that asked about the focus groups, and it was asked a couple of different ways, had a couple of questions about the demographics. Any information, were there diverse focus groups that you utilized? Just a little bit of information on that, I think, is what they wanted to know.
Yeah, it was a cross-section of the population up in northern Nevada. So it included immigrants. We talked to some folks who represent or work with the LGBTQ community, African-American community. So it was a wide range of folks that represent the diverse community of northern Nevada.
Thank you, Dr. Broom.
We don't want to get cut off at 7:30, so we want to make sure we start giving our thanks and closing remarks. This is a great conversation, one that I'm sure we can have every day, all day, because this is a hot topic. And these are questions that are being asked of the community. So I appreciate all law enforcement, sheriff, chief, both chiefs, the elected officials that joined us tonight to put ourselves out there and be open and accessible to answering some of these questions. So I sincerely thank you all. So thank you to all the residents that are watching us and the constituents. I'm sorry we didn't have more time to ask more questions, but it definitely gives the opportunity for people to attend the symposium. Hopefully here at the later part of the year, if COVID allows for that to take place and happen. But Dr. Taylor, I know you had some comments as well.
Just some comments. Thank you, my friend. Thank you, Councilman Delgado, for your partnership as we work on this together. And again, a huge thank you to our law enforcement CEOs to put yourselves out there to answer these questions, not knowing who's gonna ask what or anything like that. I don't know very many other communities where this could occur. And I would say this, let's continue the conversation. I think Chief Sola, you're the one that said the way that trust is built by doing things like that. We have to, you talk more and more about transparency, each of the three of you, the community is talking more and more about transparency as they're asking questions. And so I think us doing this thing together is how we begin to build more trust, to repair trust if ever trust has been broken down, and then to move forward. And how do we do this thing together? So I cannot thank each of the three of you enough, again, for putting yourselves out there, for participating, first of all, because you didn't have to. You certainly didn't have to. And then secondly, for throwing yourselves out there on a virtual call like this when we had no idea what questions were gonna come and you just knew we were gonna pull them and ask them. And I don't wanna overlook the importance of that, of taking your time. And to our community out there, thank you. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for the hard questions. Thank you for sharing frustration. Thank you for sharing your voice and lending it to this conversation, because this couldn't happen without you. I know there's so many more things out there you want to talk about, want to ask about, and some things we didn't even get to, but this is our first conversation. This is a first step. It isn't a last step. So let's continue the work forward together. We have a lot of digging to do, and now we all have a shovel. Let's just keep digging together. If you have any other questions, hopefully you can take them to the symposium. Right, that will be coming. I know they're working on that now, and this hopefully format will give them some ideas on how they can give you an opportunity to have more of a voice. And I know some of you ask questions, how can you be involved? And some of the advisory groups and so on. Reach out to the agencies that you like to support. I know that they could use some help in doing a lot of things that they want to do. So again, first step, not last step, okay? And let's continue to do this thing together.